For starters, I'm very disturbed by what I'm hearing. And before I get into some of the more broad things, I want to clarify something specific, ma'am, that you said. You said at the end, until last week, there was a company that didn't respond. I think you said something to that effect right near the end of your testimony. Is that true? There's a
17 companies that didn't respond, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So what that means to me is you sent this notice out. For several years, that company hasn't responded. You know that they're doing business in Iran, and no action has been taken. I mean, it's one thing when you say you're engaged with the company, but how does that meet your responsibility of engaging with these companies if you haven't had an interaction with them until last week?
Well, it's a good point, because engagement is a two-way street. And what we do and are committed to doing is making sure that we've delivered these letters, not through the mail, by courier. If necessary, in the case with another company, a Chinese company, translating it into Mandarin and sending it to the parent company.
So
now,
in 3 years, engagement has meant they finally responded last week. Is that right?
It's quite correct, and they're not the only company. And I'm using Gazprom as an example.
Well, I would contend engagement, if that's your vision of engagement, then we need a new dictionary. I mean, that is utterly ridiculous to me. I mean, how can that qualify as engagement under the law? I mean, you yourself talked about how you've not only met but gone beyond, and you're engaging in this process, and I hear that with some of these other companies, but then you mention a company that has had zero engagement, and yet we didn't divest or do anything from them, and your responsibility under this law is to engage with them. Tell me how that jives.
Well, it's a different time perspective, I'm afraid. We have a duty to make all of our efforts as we have. The example I'm giving you is a company which has finally come into a dialogue, not just with us, but with other investors on this issue, which is good, because I would suggest that companies in Russia are not familiar with this agenda. And one of the things that we're doing for many of these companies is raising this whole agenda for the first time in a new way. They've not thought about their relationship with their shareholders, and that shareholders may have questions such as those which are contained in the Act.
Well, I'll move on, but I'll contend that, to me, engaging, several years going by and just getting a letter last week is a failure to engage, and I don't think there's any way around that, but we can disagree on that for the moment. What I'm hearing fundamentally is that what you're saying is that fiduciary responsibility trumps everything, and basically, in many ways, makes the bill null and void. The underlying bill, that you're going to look at the finances most importantly, and I wonder how far that extends. If you found out that a company was making good profits, but they were doing so because they were engaged with a Colombian drug cartel, and that was, producing record profits, and you were engaged in them, but clearly this was illegal, and you knew that the United States was, as a country, was putting sanctions on the drug cartel and was doing all sorts of things to prevent it, and we here in the state were asking you to divest from that. Would we get the same response, or would that be different? Is there no limit? The analogous thing here is that the United States is sanctioning certain companies, and it may not be for their involvement in a drug cartel, but it's because of their involvement in the Iranian oil sector. So you do have a situation where you may have a foreign company that under the international laws is allowed to have all sorts of investments, but under the lens of what's good for the United States of America, we decide that is not a good investment, and we put sanctions on it. In fact, we prohibit U.S. companies from making certain investments, but you as an investor are free to invest in foreign companies, and those companies may be doing things that we don't like. And to your point about the investors looking at things, I mean, I would argue, if we, yes, the market will sort itself out, but here's a case where we clearly know, with the sanctions coming up, that their market's going to sort itself out. Those companies are going to go down when they're sanctioned by the U.S. It would be in Cal-PERS' financial interest to divest, in addition to, frankly, being in the interest of obeying the law as it was laid out, which frankly, to me, it seems like Cal-PERS is in violation of.